computer. Boom. We're now recording. And I'm gonna admit the people. All right. We see that people are starting to come into the room. We know some more people will be coming because it is now. If you are not on mute, beloved, hello. Make sure that you stay on mute because we don't want to hear you. We want to hear us. I love you. But there will be time for questions throughout. So if you have a question, go ahead and put your question in the chat. We'll come to it. And then as we get to the kind of last 15, 20 minutes of the space, we'll also open up. People want to come off the camera and ask their questions. We'll try to monitor the chat as best as we can, but there are a lot of y'all. So baby, it's going to be hard work. But with that being said, I am Dr. Nancy Wilson, Associate Professor of Constitutional and Criminal Law, and I am the founding director for the Center for the Study of Black Life and the Law at Mitchell Hamlin, soon to be at the University of Kansas. And so with that, the title of our conversation today. What I tell you about that mute? Don't play with me. The title of our conversation today is Locating the Pride in Juneteenth, right? All four of us exist in this space as Black queer people who don't exist at the intersections of Blackness and queerness, but exist in a moment where these things are co-forming and co-creating each other. So what we're going to be doing today is giving you our perspectives on what this moment means to us, what it has meant historically, even when unspoken or untaught or unthought, but also what it means for the future and the children that comes next, and what we can take from this current moment. So for those of you that don't know, the holiday of Juneteenth was recently made a federal holiday thanks to the tireless 60 or 70 years of work by Miss Opal Lee and others who have helped her with this campaign. Shout out to Opal Lee. Today, she was gifted a home, her old historic childhood home that was rebuilt because in 1939 it was burned down by the Klan and other members of a white mob. So shout out to her for continuing this work and also making sure that Juneteenth is a national holiday. So for those of you that don't know, Juneteenth is a celebration of the temporal moment that folks in Galveston, Texas, one of the last groups of people, at least in that year, right, in that year frame, 2 years later, after the Emancipation Proclamation was read, they got the good news of freedom. It became clear to them that slavery was over and they were legally free. And not only were they legally free, as they were when the Emancipation Proclamation was read and pronounced by President Lincoln, but the federal troops had arrived to make sure that that freedom was made manifest. Now, we talk about Juneteenth, and the rhetoric around Juneteenth has been that when Juneteenth happened, it was the end of slavery. But I want to remind people that up until 1960, in Arkansas and in some parts of Texas, there were still Black people who did not know that slavery had ended, right? So let's keep that in mind, even as we think about and we ruminate on and we reflect on the power and the moment of emancipation and freedom, to also think and note that emancipation is an incomplete project, particularly in this moment where Blackness exists as a precondition for having skewed life chances. So with that, we will have our panelists introduce themselves, and then after that, we will hear a reflection from each person about what does Juneteenth mean to them? What does it mean historically? What can we take from this moment? And what do we want for the children who come next? So who would like to start? Go ahead, jump in.
I think since I'm the elder of the group, I'm gonna go first. I'm gonna pull rank. Hey
Yes.
y'all, beautiful, beautiful people. My name is Dre. I'm originally from New York. I think I'm the only person that's not from the South or the Midwest of the group. Um, I am. I like to, tell folks I'm the great grandson of individuals who I know for a fact did not have the right to vote for the first time until 1966 because of Jim Crow. I am the son of a woman who since transitioned, but was almost died in childbirth because we have some of the worst maternal mortality rates in the world. And this is one of the hardest places in the world to have a baby for a Black woman, for anyone. I'm the nephew of a woman named Alberta Spurl, who was the victim of extrajudicial murder by the NYPD in 2003. And I lead with this because it's a part of my story that most people won't know, but I think helps to inform my work. It helps to inform my politics and really just how I move about in life. So I'm really happy to be in this space right now with my friends, my brothers, my sisters, to talk about freedom with you beautiful people tonight. So I hope y'all enjoy this. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Dre. Who would like to jump in?
I go, Dre already started, we're going in order. Age. So everybody, I'm Taurean McCrea. I'm one of the Southerners in the group, which I think is definitely going to be something that informs my perspective on anything. And again, I'm here to talk, but also to learn. Met Anansi in law school at Howard Law. So, that's where we got to know each other. And of course, when I moved back down to Atlanta, which again was me coming back to the South, and in a lot of ways was a coming home, which is something I'll talk about. I reflect on a lot when I talk about coming back to the South. But it's where I met Dre and Asa, and of course, has been a place where I've been just examining what it is like and is to be a Black queer person. So definitely happy to be here. Glad to be a part of the discussion, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Hey, Jim.
Okay, come on.
A
Man,
moment.
I didn't see you there.
All right, and so I guess with everyone already gone, then I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Asa Bennet-Fludd, and I am to a Southerner. I'm from South Carolina, Pineville. It's close to Charleston, South Carolina. Couple of fun facts. I've never met Torian until like 2015, 2016, but actually, we live like 15 miles away from each other. We went to neighboring high schools. So until then, we have never known each other until 2016 and everything. But that gives like a little bit of aspect of how close we are, but how far we are. Once again, from Pineville, South Carolina, and I am the youngest of five. I was raised by my mother. My dad died when he was two. I mean, when I was two, in a car accident. And I want to lead with that because not only, she took care of five amazing children who have went off to done amazing things. She was one of the people who made me understand what it is to be not just, a Black person, but understanding what Black women do for us. So it would be remiss if I do not mention anything about my mother, my grandmother, and the Black women who have taken the time to take care of me and from schooling and everything up until even today. And so as I reflect over Juneteenth, that's what I thought about. I thought about, how they made me understand how knowledge is power and everything. So with that, that's a little bit about myself and how I'm feeling in this moment right now. And of course, I want to thank all of y'all because y'all are my amazing friends, and I've known all of y'all for almost nearly a decade now, and we're gonna ride forever until the end.
Yes. So I did not mention that, of course, these are my closest friends. So we're in this moment together. So I did mention, well, I should say too, that it's also interesting, and I think it's telling that I asked you all for your introductions. And you each gave a very personal rendition of who you are, and no one even mentioned their profession and what the hell you do. So shout out to us to that. People should probably know that, so we'll deal with that when we get to questions and our reflections. But I did send out to each of them this question, and we'll answer all of these throughout this conversation. But I did ask them each to provide a quick meditation or short meditation on what Juneteenth means to them, particularly as a Black queer person with its intersections with pride. In what ways are we free? In what ways do we continue to experience unfreedom? In the law, in our relationships, in our jobs, in our social and private spaces. And finally, Juneteenth is about the good news of freedom. Is there a difference between freedom and liberation? If so, what? Can we ever achieve either? What is your freedom dream for yourself, your elders, and the children who come next? We can go in any particular order.
I guess I can start off. So I'm gonna take this. So as I said, I did a lot of thinking and meditation on Juneteenth today, and the first thing I thought about was, of course, what Juneteenth is, and then in the forms of simply what the holiday is. But now that it's a federal holiday, and that the difference is that one is the fact that we are free, and the other is that we're validated in being free and that being seen around the United States and hopefully the world. What I mean by that is, of course, June 19th, 1865. Yes, that was when, freedom actually became a thing in the United States for slavery. However, we're now looking at 2021 when Joe Biden has passed a law to make it a federal holiday. And it's funny to see how white people are trying to figure out how to celebrate this day, right? When for us, it is something to look back at what our ancestors have done and to understand how, we are learning how to free ourselves from any of the work that we have to do on a daily basis. I spent my morning, doing some work today with my husband, and it took a little bit longer than what I expected to. I love, there's love and then there's work. But outside of that, it was the fact that it was taking a little bit longer than I expected. And I'm like, no, I'm not working today. Right. So it's one of those things where I have to even place my boundaries and knowing that I'm free, even in these spaces as well. So I'm going to say that, what Juneteenth means to me personally is that each and every day you have the fight to be free in every situation that you do. I don't want to say a choice because that is not the best word to ever say when we talk about slavery, right? But in this space right now, we're always fighting towards making sure that we get towards our sense of freedom, being able to understand ourselves, be able to communicate the ways that we want to communicate.
Mhm.
And there is no convention behind it. And so with that, it's the fact that as being Black as well as being queer, I want to make sure that everyone understands that I'm going to move my way that I move. And I'm not doing it because I don't care about how other people feel. It's more so that I have to be me to be me. And so that is what Juneteenth means to me in this current state. And it has gotten me into a great place. And I think that it's going to get me into a better place as times goes on. You ask in what ways are we free? I think that, in the increments of how, history has happened, we take a look at, where we could have been in the 1860s or the 1850s, in the 1800s or the 1900s, but we're here in 2024, and there's a lot of things that we should be proud of, that we're capable of doing as compared to where we were centuries and years ago. And so for that, I am grateful, and I'm grateful for my ancestors who have allowed me to get to this space and allow us to get into this space as well. But we cannot, forget the fact that, while we are able to have our own homes, we are able to, move around in the way that we decide to move around, that there are people who are looking to oppress us, oppress our feelings, the way that we should interact with people, the way that we should love, the way that we should be viewed. And it's one of those things where I kind of mentioned it before, even, in my own personal space, that you have to tell people that you are free to do these things, even though that they want to hold you down.
Mhm.
So it's just as simple as that. Um, I'm going to leave it right there, but
Yeah.
that's really all that I want to mention in that moment. And I think that later on we will go a little bit more into that, into the other questions.
No, thank you for that. I mean, one of the things that you
Yeah.
said, and I'm sure other people will hint at this well, is this kind of implication of emancipation and freedom as a daily struggle, as a moment by moment. And, you didn't use the word choice, but it's a decision to struggle against domination as a Black person, as a Black queer person, and not just domination insofar as the state, right? The government, the law, the police trying to harm you, but also domination within yourself, saying that, wait a minute, why am I working right now? My body requires rest. So there's that internalized domination that we deal with, where we tend to internalize the oppressor outside that becomes the police officer within that says, why are you resting? You're lazy. Right?
Yes.
Why are you
Yes.
ignoring your boundary? You're bratty. You complain too much. Why are you saying how you feel? You're too sensitive, right?
Yes.
But what you kind of brought us to, and then I'm gonna let the next person go on and think further about their own work and their own thoughts. But what you brought us closer to is this idea about the body itself being in type of occupied territory, where every day we're trying to fight for liberation of ourself and ownership of our own self. And I thought that was just very powerful, the way you brought that up. So who wants to jump on in here? Ace has laid it down on the threshing floor.
I know
So,
that's right, because I do not dream of labor either at all, friend, at all. It's a nightmare, actually. Um, I think that, oh, as a Black queer person, the intersection of Juneteenth and Pride holds really profound significance for me. Basically representing a journey toward freedom that is both collective and, like what Ace was talking about, deeply personal as well, right? It's a testament to resilience and the enduring spirit of Black and queer people, right? A celebration of our survival, of our culture, and our continued fight for equality in this country, right? Whether it be within the country, I know, and I say you mentioned the state, but also like within our own communities, within our families, within our friendships, within our relationships as well, right?
mhm.
Um, Simultaneously, it's Pride Month, which we know is a time to honor the courage and resilience of our LGBTQ plus heroes, um, and folk. And for those of us who stand really at this intersection, these celebrations we have to remember are not merely historical remembrances. They're lived experiences of struggle, of joy, and relentless pursuit of true freedom. So when I was reflecting on this earlier, on what it means to be free, I was reminded that freedom really isn't a monolith, right? In many ways, we've made significant strides, legally with the abolition of slavery, with civil rights movements that stretch from the 1860s to modern days, right? We're still fighting for civil rights. Most folks will mention the legalization of of same-sex marriage. We were just talking about this the other day, how up until just a couple years ago, it was illegal to be gay, right? In this country. Um, and I think these things are significant because they mark advancements and protections for us as individuals, and they also mark critical victories. But these milestones, as we can call them, they may be monumental, but they don't equate to freedom as a whole, right? Like we're making strides, but that doesn't mean that we're free just because we're chipping away at these things. So like in our daily lives, many of us, we still continue to experience what I would call like the lingering shadows of unfreedom,
Mm.
systemic racism, discrimination. They still persist in our legal systems, from policing practices to sentencing disparities in the workplace. Most of us, have dealt with and had to face the double burden of racial and queer phobic discrimination, which sometimes impact our opportunities and our mental health, right? Dealing with white folks sometimes at some of these jobs, and sometimes your own people, right? And how difficult that can be. Um, we socially, which is a big thing, right? We have to navigate spaces that are not always accepting of our full identity. Sometimes even within our own communities, right? Think about how some of us treat, and when I say us, I'm talking about us all, right? Treat the femme girlies, right, or the trans folk, right, or the gender non-conforming folk, right? They are treated differently. So when I speak about the lingering shadows of unfreedom, these are the things that I'm talking about. And then even in our relationships, right? We talk about the freedom to love and, express our true selves, how sometimes that's still met with resistance because other folks ain't free, right? Or they're not trying to do the freedom work, or they're not trying to heal, or they don't want to be free. They want to participate in uh, whatever the status quo is and heteronormative practices, whatever. So there's work to do there as well. And for many of us who are Black and queer, the fear of rejection or violence is a constant companion, right? This dual marginalization, it forces us to carve out spaces of belonging and safety, which is often in the face of significant adversity. So I know I probably was talking a little bit too long. I don't want to take up too much time, but those are some thoughts that I had in reflecting on what the holiday means, um, and some of the work we just have to do in terms of our freedom work, externally and internally.
Yeah, so I love that because what I'm getting from what, Dre was just talking about is not just this idea of freedom as this notion of the government no longer oppressing you or private white individuals no longer holding you as enslaved, but the freedom to enact your own will, right? The ability to live within your own truth. And at the very basic level, the ability to live. Right. We're talking about this idea, during slavery of cheating death moment by moment, day by day, um, untangling and sometimes retangling the anxieties and mythologies of the master on the plantation so you're not raped, killed, maimed, right, or dismembered in particular types of ways. And so when you were speaking, Dre, you reminded me, and some of my students are so they're probably tired of this quote, but reminded me of the quote by Saidiya Hartman, and it reads, quote, if slavery persists as an issue in the political life of Black America, it is not because of an antiquated obsession with bygone days or the burden of a too long memory, but it is because Black lives are still imperiled and devalued by a racial calculus and a political arithmetic that were entrenched centuries ago. This is the afterlife of slavery: skewed life chances, limited access to health and education, premature death, incarceration, and impoverishment, end quote. And so when we think about slavery itself, yes, slavery is ended, but we're also still in this moment where our life chances, our chances to live, our chances to breathe, our opportunity for clean water, right? Fresh air is imperiled by a racial calculus that was created during slavery. And when we look at the 13th Amendment that really legally abolished slavery, right? It abolished slavery except for as the result of a commission of a crime. And so immediately we have the mass incarceration of Black folks. Immediately we have the slave patrol, right? Who then become what we now know as the police, right? As this validated piece of government and of statecraft. So thank you for that, Dre. Miss Twain McCrea, hey bestie, what you got?
So again, for me, I definitely want to take it to the personal again because I guess a little anecdote. I work today, right? And I noticed the last couple of days leading up to Juneteenth, a lot of my white colleagues, they just kept referring to the federal holiday, right? So like, oh, we have the federal holiday off. I'm off the federal holiday. They never called it by its name. And you realize for them, it didn't really mean anything to them, right? Face's point, they don't, some of them trying to figure out how to celebrate it, some of them don't even acknowledge it. It's another day off, right? But for me, it had to be something different. And what I took from that too was that this is giving me the opportunity to stop and reflect, as we keep mentioning, right? Stop and take a moment. And for me, Juneteenth feels like a moment of self-actualization. So I'm just trying to write down my thoughts where I could and taking that time, right? Because again, I hadn't taken the time off and just snatched that back and said, I deserve this. So in that writing and that thinking, I was realizing that locating Pride and Juneteenth for me felt like coming home. It was like realizing you're not alone, you're not the first, last, and only, but you're the latest in a lineage of people, right? And for me, I've moved around a lot. I've changed and evolved over the course of my life, but it feels like a chance for me to say, I come from somewhere, right? And with that, I thought about it and I realized I didn't grow up celebrating Juneteenth, right? And I don't know, Ace, if you remember, like, I don't know, maybe it was the same in your school, but we had a little budget cuts. We in the rural South, poor. We weren't, there was a lot we probably missed out on. We just didn't grow up celebrating that. And honestly,
Agreed.
pride wasn't a thing there. It still isn't a thing, to be honest. So these were two experiences I didn't have, but I definitely will say that me now evolving and being aware of myself as a Black and queer person, that for me now, this feels like a communal space because that's what my experience has become over this time, right? So it's a bit of a grounding and a time for me to really actually stop and sit, stop, think about what my ancestors have gone through. And not just the people I'm kin to by blood, right? I'm also talking about queer ancestors as well, right? There's queer elders who come before me. So it's a time for me to stop, actually learn more about them and their stories, memorialize those histories, and build traditions. I enjoyed the conversation yesterday. We were just talking about different things to do, right? People are talking, and people might say jokingly, but I think there's an opportunity there, right? Talk about leaving out cookies to Harriet Tubman, or baking hush puppies, right? But I think there's a moment really there to build those traditions that are important. Because again, I'm someone who didn't grow up with that, but I realize how this moment means a lot for me now, and I am forcing myself to stop and reckon with what this means for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized as a Black and queer person, we've always had to do that. We've always had to build traditions. Again, as Dre was mentioning, against adversity, right? You still have to build it in the face of that. We created and carved out spaces for ourselves. So what I think about is those very specific ways that my parents, grandparents, and their parents existed in the South, right? That, yeah, there was freedom, by a legal proclamation, but what did that actually mean for them afterward, right? They still had to struggle to put food on the table day to day. They still had to find their bits of joy where they could, right? Even that was just, we got some food here today, y'all come over and eat, or we just sitting on the front porch gossiping about whoever down the street. People still found their joy where they could. I think about their relationship to their land, right? Again, when I'm talking about coming from somewhere and how they still held a joy and at least some degree, I don't want to say power, but definitely they felt some identity with that and that sense of place by saying, this is our land. In South Carolina, you hear folks talk all the time about heirs property. They'll be yelling about heirs property. That is its own bucket of worms that we need to deal with. But they'll talk about that. And whether they stitch together a little piece of land here, a little acre there, it's like, this is ours, right? And again, it's them finding that sense of place and that identity. And I want to sit with and recognize that in the ways we are building our collective identities and building those rituals and see ourselves as a group of people. So when I think about that and with pride, and I'm thinking from the lens of somebody who came into knowing myself as a queer person and loving myself as a queer person a little later in adulthood, as y'all know. Right. And sometimes there are times where it felt like I was a stranger in my own family, as I'm sure a lot of folks do, right? Amongst your own Black kin. And I'm not here to dump on Black people collectively, because again, we are all learning and unlearning so many things together as people, right? But it also gives me a chance to realize that I get to celebrate all of my families, all of those lineages, those chosen and those I was born into, and even recognize the ways in which we have been here before, right? You hear them talking about Uncle so and so, he was a little different, he was a little funny, or Miss so and so down the street, and you realize we've always been here. We've always been a part of our greater collective story of Blackness here in America. And what I'm excited about when I think about freedom, I think about growth, is the opportunity for all of us to really feel like we can be our whole and full selves, right? And I think not even just queer people, but Black people in general. I think about somebody like my dad just growing his hair and deciding this is who I'm going to be, and this is who I get to be. So think across the board, I still am sitting down to figure out and think about what does freedom and or versus liberation look like for me. But I do think that will mean that we also get to undertake our own personal journeys within the collective to say, I get to be a whole and full person. So definitely am excited to have that discussion.
So you're bringing us to this kind of connection between the notion of home, freedom, and self-fashioning, right? And I haven't thought about that before, so like my thoughts are kind of jumbled on this. This is what you love to do to me, bestie. But I think it's important for us to think about, like, can you have a home if you do not have freedom? Can you be free without the ability to self-fashion, right? And if you are able to self-fashion, where do you get the power, the space, the privilege, and the privacy to experiment with that but home? And Christina Sharp has a quote in her book, Monstrous Intimacy. She says, oftentimes home is where the hatred is, right? And so I think so much about young queer children across race, particularly Black queer children, because, my people, that is oftentimes where we learn hatred. And not hatred necessarily because you're queer, but hatred perhaps because you don't fit this model of manhood or womanhood, or gender is not something you claim, but it's imposed upon you. And so maybe the hate isn't of yourself, but it's of the conditions of your living, right? It's the ways in which your mother or your father talk about this topic or talk about you. So I'm interested in this kind of thinking about, what are the ways that we have learned to sustain ourselves, both in childhood to the present, right? In ways that are healthful and hopeful, right? That get us unto tomorrow. Because I think when we look at today, the data is very, very clear about the suicide rates among Black and Latino as well, and Indigenous, LGBTQ children, right? The homelessness rates, the rates of drug use. And that is because for them, home is where the hatred is. And it's also for them, they do not have a grammar or have the power or the freedom to engage in a particular type of self-fashioning. Home is not a safe space. Home is not a freedom space. So if you were to interface with those children right now, right, what advice would you either give them or would you give young you with the hindsight of, I'm not going to date all of y'all, but 20, 30 years or what?
Closer to 20,
I'm 25.
Yeah, I've been 30 for the last 6 years. I don't know what you're talking about. Listen.
But the children who come next, what advice would you give them or young you? Particularly now as you sit in this moment of being able to hold both Blackness and queerness, not as separate entities that meet at some intersection of intersectionality, but two things that have been always you, that have always co-formed and reformed and remixed each other.
I think also when you talked about home and freedom, I wanted to mention and go back to the aspect of safety as well, because I think that's a huge thing. Um, Coming up, I I too found myself a little bit later in life than probably like T and Ace. Um, but I just think about the anxiety, right, around like just doing anything that was othered, right, from what my family or even friends, right, like growing up, saw as the normal,
Mhm.
right? So in a sense, it didn't feel safe to do anything that was outside of the space or that outside of what was believed to be the standard way of doing it. Like, I think back to, even my grandparents. I grew up Kojic. And, up in the Kojic church, no braids, no earrings, no
It
tattoos,
was boss
uh,
natural back
no
then.
no dancing, like no card playing, so things like that. There were always these rules of no, right? So in a sense, right, it didn't feel safe. And it to me, it was another form of slavery. I'm not going to be dramatic here because like it was, right? Like I was not able to experience freedom. I was not able to even understand what it was because this was the normal, for me. And I don't blame them at all, right? Like I give them grace, I give myself grace for whatever it is because those that was what they knew, right? But we know better, right? So when I think about what I would tell myself or even how I practice with my nieces and nephews, right? Or the babies, the baby cousins, right? The younger cousins in the family, um, is is really ensuring that they have the space to one always feel safe,
Mhm.
uh and always feel as if they can go against what is othered, right? But it's not only practicing it with them, it's also practicing it with the my peers, right? Like my siblings, right? My aunts and my uncles, right? Like my older cousins who are of age,
Mhm.
because if we don't, honestly, it's just going to be cyclical behavior, right? And those children will experience the same things that we've experienced,
Mhm.
and ultimately they won't be able to experience freedom like they should be able to. And then there's also, emotional security, right? That is a big thing. This well-being, is a critical asset for them to feel at home, right? Because if they're feeling it at home, if I felt this at home, I would have went out into the world and felt I could do anything, right? If this had started in the place that was close to me.
Mhm.
So this whole concept of home and freedom, I think they go hand in hand because that is the first place we are going to learn to be free,
Mhm.
right? And as through example, so maybe when I have my kids, they just gonna know, right? Like this gonna be a healed household. This gonna be a household where we learn and we grow together, right? We don't practice the behaviors of the past just because grandma did this or mama did this or daddy did this does not mean we gonna do this, right? We're going to go beyond and continue to pursue the freedom dream, each and every day.
Mhm.
And my freedom dream may be different from what their freedom dream is, right? But I'm going to fight to make sure that they can achieve their freedom dream as well. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
I love that. I mean, you're making me think about how the fact that like, slavery is not just a system, right? It's not just the idea of these laws and these practices where people are actually physically enslaved and sexually trespassed against and all these things. But slavery is actually also a logic, right? A logic of social control, a logic of debasing the so-called other, a praxis of othering. And then when you think about slavery, obviously we think about the abolitionists. And what you were talking about in terms of kind of like abolishing these kind of afterlives of slavery as a logic, the way your grandparents might think, or your parents might treat a little queer kid, or like, I don't know about that. But this is the way I know how to do it, right? These are still those same logic of social control, but your role, and you talk about your aunties and uncles and the people you encounter, the elders, that's an abolitionist praxis, right? So abolition isn't just about emancipation or the 13th Amendment. It's about the work of daily emancipation, right? Of the minds of the minds of our elders and of ourselves, right? And the ways in which we go against dealing with difference or deal with dealing with difference, but also the ways in which we deal with fear, right? So the question is, are you enacting, or are you reacting rather, as an enslaver or as an abolitionist? And I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. In Imani Perry's book, just got National Book of the Year award, South to America, she says, there are two gods. There's the God of the enslaved, and there's the God of the enslaver. Which one are you praying to? Whose will are you acting in accordance with? And I think that's something we have to begin to ask ourselves, particularly when we have these emotionally heightened moments. Wait a minute. And what testament am I following? Right? What sacred text, right, is my reaction based in? Also, I really love this notion of kind of bringing up abolition, not just as the abolition of slavery, the abolition of prisons, but the abolition of a mindset that is about social control, that social control kind of requires, well, our experience of safety requires a type of social control, even though safety itself is a mythology. So thank you for that, Dre. Jump in, folks, jump in. I'm looking
I
so much.
want,
I love it.
when you were saying that about those two guys, would that also include somebody when we think about their own internalized practices and how they view themselves, right? Because if I'm thinking what I would have told myself, it would be, there's nothing wrong with you. Because I believe that, you know. I but I accepted that. And that's what I thought. And I spent a great deal of time hoping I could be fixed,
Mm.
right? My first experiences with therapy were basically help me be straight. Get this. Let's fix this. Right. So it's an internalized thing there as well. And I think what would have helped me is me knowing from young that there's nothing wrong with you. We see the little bits and parts of you as they're coming together. But I felt like they were something I needed to fix or get rid of and whatnot. And and I think that again, like I said, that's the internalized part there where I'm an enslaver in my own mind at this point. Right. So just like trying to figure out how to overcome that when I'm thinking about liberation psychologically. Right. Um, I think yesterday too we were talking, and we were talking about this over dinner. It was just again, and Dre, you were getting to this too, it was about self-expression. Like I would definitely want, queer children to have a space where they can really be themselves and really open up about how they are experiencing the world. I think there's a lot, for a lot of us anyway, masking became the way we navigated the world, became the way we were able to survive. If I could just hide those parts of me that are othered, right? I won't have to worry about dealing with any additional level of adversity. And you get used to that. Eventually, at some point, you forget your own voice. You don't even know who you are, what you actually look like, because you're so used to wearing that mask. So I definitely think it would have been different if I had a space where I could just say, this is what I'm experiencing. This is who I like. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm thinking about. And I would want to be able to provide that for queer children, any child, to be honest, but queer children. And I would definitely want little Taurean to have had that, somebody to talk to instead of simply having people foist an idea onto you as who you are, even if some of those ideas felt good, right? Oh, you're smart, or nothing bothers you. You're like a duck; everything rolls off your back. But no, things aren't rolling off my back. This thing bothers me, And I actually want to talk about that. I wish I had a space for it, but I just accepted that this is a good thing. This is who I am, right? And you lose your voice over time. So I definitely would want to provide that for queer children.
I mean,
And to echo,
yeah, go ahead.
go
Go ahead.
ahead.
No, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say to also echo off of that, Torian, it's one thing for, for the young queer child to be who they are, right? In the same token, also not taken advantage of, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
for who they are. And I think one of the things that always reminds me is that, as a child, or I don't even want to put this in the same space, but being someone who is enslaved or anything that there is a power dynamic, right? Where it's still the fact that if I am this queer child or if I am someone that I have to be this way for you to feel great and for you to feel whole and for you to live on through your life. At times, we do still need to adventure. We still have to have that sense of saying, hey, this is who I am, and learning how to be unapologetic about it. Of course, making sure that we don't harm other people. I mean, they don't harm other people in the act and everything. But for the most part, being able to say, yo, this is who I am, and I'm living in it. And you are still able to be my parent. You're still able to be my teacher. You're still able to be my pastor. There's a lot of things that you are capable of
Mhm.
teaching me and influencing me to be the best person that I could be in this world, but I'm still me and I should have power of that and you should not take advantage of who I am because I am this.
Mhm.
So yes.
Yeah, so I just said a couple of things are coming up for both what Ace was saying and also Torian, right? So with Ace, we're talking about this idea of the ability to be protected, right? And that is something that I think queer people are very familiar with, is the inability to be protected, quite frankly, right? The idea that whatever happens to you, particularly if it's a type of sexual trespass, it's something you deserve because you're a deviant. That is parallel to the arguments and the logics for enslaved people. If something happened to you, it's because you deserved it. It's because you were not performing right. It's because there's a defect in your being. So this idea, both for enslaved folks, but also for folks that are living under the cis heterosexist regime from antiquity to the present, is this idea that one, you're not entitled to safety, but everyone else is, and in fact, everyone else's safety depends on violations of you. It depends on your oppression. There's a direct relationship between those two things. And then secondly, Torian was also talking about this idea, right, of desire. Who has the power to actually desire freely, right? And what happens when your desire becomes a precondition for the policing of your essence? And what are humans, right? Without desire itself, it motivates us to do so many things. And we think about desire oftentimes as not as something that is very sexual, but desire also means, what do I want to eat today? How do I want to style my hair? What job do I want to have? Do I want to work or rest? Right. And so desire is also just what the things that we want for ourselves. And so when we think about both enslavement and we think about, the fact that Lawrence versus Texas, the Supreme Court case, and I'm going to nerd out for a moment, so bear with me, all that don't do law things. But 2003 is Lawrence versus Texas, right? This is a case where a black man who's not even named in the case, truly, Tyron, and they misspell his name in the case as Tyrone, Tyron Gardner, right? Was at an apartment with his ex-boyfriend, a white boy, and his ex-boyfriend's friend having some beer and smoking a blunt. The ex-boyfriend fears or feels that Tyrone is hooking up with his friend or being too flirty with him. So he exits the apartment, goes to a payphone, calls the police, and says there's a big black man who has kicked down the door to an apartment and he's waving a gun and he's going to kill people. This is because he thinks Tyron is exacting some type of sexual freedom and doing with his body what he will, right? So he calls the police, has the police come in with this deadly force to put down this black brute, right? Who's clearly a thug and about to rob this community or kill somebody, what have you. So the police come in. There are three officers. One officer says, "Oh, I saw them engage in anal sex." Interesting. The second officer says, "Well, I saw them engage in oral sex. It wasn't anal sex." The third officer was like, they were sitting on a couch smoking a blunt. Like, what's going on? Now, they all enter at the same time. These are three very different stories, right? But it's important to note that this case becomes a case about, one, the right to privacy in the Fourth Amendment, but more importantly, this idea about privacy and consensual sexual matters, and this idea of bodily autonomy being again kind of reinstantiated from Roe v. Wade and other parts of the constitutional jurisprudence. But what's important here is to kind of think about this idea of queer consensual sex being legal comes through the contestation of a Black queer man's body and his inability to say, and we don't even know they even said this, I want to have sex with someone else, right? So it's the claims of his ex-partner onto his own body that then allows us to have this idea of sexual autonomy. So it's Black and queer people's inability to have sexual autonomy that births sexual autonomy for queer people writ large. And even in this moment, right, it's anti-Blackness that allows the police to come into this moment and believe this farce. So anti-Blackness and this kind of hypersexuality and hyperviolence of Black men that is kind of posed upon people becomes the Trojan horse that allows queer rights to breathe. And so that's why when we think about Pride Month, we have to always think about Black folks and anti-Blackness. And of course, we know Stonewall was started by a Black trans woman, right, fighting back, and other Black trans women fighting year over year. But also the beginning of the queer rights movement in the United States, and I put the link in the chat, begins with William Dorsey Swann, a gender non-conforming person in the 1850s who was having some people across race who were all queer at their house for some beer and champagne. And the police get a tip and they kick in the door, and Dorsey Swann says, wait a minute, you are not a gentleman, you shall not pass, and throws herself. And I use both gender pronouns because I don't usually have them, off of the stairs onto the police officer to blockade them from getting to the other people. The judge in that case tries to sentence William Dorsey Swann to 20 years of hard labor because they say they have infected the good men of the community with their wiles and their femininity and with their perverse mind. So we can think about the queer rights movement in the United States as actually principally being a movement by formerly enslaved queer Black people. But the conversation and the argument we usually get is a Harvey Milk type of articulation of what is going on. But if you actually look at the history, there was nothing milky about it. It was based in melanin, and it was something about people escaping the noose. So it's important that when we think about these queer ancestors to always already think about them as Black ancestors. And the same thing with our Black ancestors when we think about people like Bayard Rustin, right, organizing the entire March on Washington. But folks, what other people have to say? What other questions or things do people want to engage with? We're almost at 9 o'clock. If folks in the audience want to pop on, ask a question, add some context, or my sisters, Brista's siblings on the stage, if there are directions you want to take this in, get into it. It's all the stage is yours.
I love what you were just talking about in terms of the onset of queer rights in the country, and also naming how Black people started them. And it takes me back to a conversation that we were having. Uh, it was some time ago. I think it might have been towards the end of last year or at some point earlier this year, where
Mm.
we talked about how to be Black is to be queer, right? And I wanted y'all to touch on that just a little bit, because I think you led us right into that moment with uh, that history lesson that you just gave us. But to take it a step further, like what does it mean when you say be Black is to also be queer?
Mhm, mhm. You're not asking me, you're asking the group, yeah.
I'm asking any of y'all.
Get into it a lot. Get into
That's for the group. Yeah. Yeah. McCrea, Flood, Bennet-Fludd, excuse me, Wilson.
it. I'll just say this very quickly. I'll let the folks, because they always got their thinking faces on and things. But I was like, I think I do truly believe that to be Black is to be queer. And it's because, Blackness as a type of notion of humanity, right, is an imposition on the kind of static natures of historically and classically, both in philosophy and law, of what the human was constituted of, right? The human was this so-called civilized Western European. And so this notion that these Africans who are now Black, now enslaved, now chattel, now actually legally treated worse than pigs and cows, would assert some humanity and do it differently, right? Would wear their natural hair, would speak in the ways in which they speak, would stand and walk with the rhythm and the flow that we walk with and that we talk with, right? That in and of itself is a queering of the norm. It's a disruption of the kind of hegemonic ways of being. And not only that, we bring with us these ethics from Western Africa that are not the same as these kind of Western Christian Judeo so-called values, right? This is their concern with rugged individualism. We're concerned with community, right? We're concerned with these kind of multi-generational households that may not even be connected by blood, but are connected by intention, right? That are connected by value and ethic and necessity. And people are choosing to be in community with one another. When I think about the ending of slavery, one of the things I always get teared up about, when we think about the Freedmen Bureau's letters and articles, is there are so many children who had no parents. And I think about this in terms of Gaza right now too, because their parents had been killed trying to run away from the plantation, or they've been caught by Noche Native Americans, particularly the Cherokee, and trying to run away and re-enslaved or murdered. They've been caught by vigilante white folks, murdered, lynched, body parts sold as trophies. We understand there's still that museum, I think it's in Virginia, that has all these dishes made from the flesh of Black people, formerly enslaved Black people, belts and bowls and cups and water containers and things. And Black people that had no relation to these children took them in and said, "You're my child now." Not in a kidnapping way, but in the "you have nowhere to go, and I'm your new home" way. I don't got no food. I can't read. I can't write. And I may probably will never get hired for a job, but I'm going to make sure I'm spending my life making sure you have a life. So for me, that is why I say that Blackness inevitably is a queering of humanity. And it's a remixing of those things that happened before and were used as toxins to kill and usurp our essence, that we've made to make ourselves these unaging, melanated, full, and culturally, incomparable people. But my sisters, what y'all got? Talk to the girls.
You know, to thinking about this, I've been thinking about it for a second. And the only thing I could think about is, you know, blandness and flavor.
Mm.
And how, I could say we have vanilla ice cream and they have to be, the ice cream, but the world is made when you have chocolate and sprinkles on it, right? Meaning good and well that, when you're Black and queer, you make this world, you make it what it is in order for you to eat up probably most of all the chocolate and the sprinkles and leave the vanilla ice cream, right? Because you know exactly what you want.
Mm.
We are the alternatives. We are the ones who really set the culture and make things what it is. And so as as quickly as soon as the world learns, like, I know that we know it between us, between everyone in the chat and the people who do know
Mhm.
that we are that we need to understand that, hey, we bring a lot to the table and that we always will go in unison, regardless of if we're always going to be together. Even if you might not like us together, we're still together, if that makes sense. Um, that's the only thing I could really think about. Like, that's just how it is. We're both a part of a different, we're different, but we're still the same and we still have a very big impact to our world, and we actually change the world more than people know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, Miss McCrea.
I'm just trying to string together some thoughts here, but I think of how sometimes we are judged or very harshly misunderstood for just our own cultural practices, things that we enjoy culturally, right? Whether it's us and our loud music, we have the cookout and the block party, whatever, just how we show up, how we choose to dress, right? And these things are important to us that we have been reclaiming as culture,
Yeah.
but people look at as disruptive, as potentially a sign that some type of criminal or deviant behavior is about to occur, right? But and how we are having to pretty much gatekeep these types of things now, right? And say, hey, no, this is who we are, this is our culture, and this is what we have actually created. This thing is a valid and a real experience for us, right?
Mhm.
And because I think that's something that, especially as African Americans, we do deal with a lot, right? Particularly those folks, those of us who are descended from enslaved Africans, whereas our culture is not seen as real or valid, right? Something that was just made up the other day, right? And it's just y'all made this up because y'all were poor and uneducated and ignorant, right? And I think viewing that and our blackness and our culture as queer is us saying, you know what? I don't have to do things the way you do it. I don't have to. Us growing and maturing as a people, as a collective, doesn't mean suddenly we turn into white people. That we suddenly start viewing ourselves as the dominant macro culture of how white people operate in the United States. No, that we still take on our culture, we embrace that, and we say, this is what we're going to do. This is real and this is valid, and it might be different from what y'all have going on, but maybe I don't care. This is what we got, and this is who we are. And I guess from that, I really enjoy and appreciate again, mentioning again that we built these traditions and rituals for ourselves. And I want for us to always see those things as real and as valid as things that we continue to build on, that we continue to pass down, that we continue to say, this is who we are, right? Embracing the idea that, yes, this is queer, right? It's the same as saying that our blackness is real and
Mhm.
I love it. And I'm not going to sacrifice this on the altar of white supremacy and living in America and deciding that ultimately our destiny as a collective was become like white people. No.
Yeah.
So still stringing it together, but that's more or less
Well,
where I can go.
you're making me think about, we always, you and I particularly always make this joke, and also, Dre and Ace as well, but, we talk about losing recipes, right?
Yes.
Goodness. I was urban, y'all know homegirl Keisha. I was over her house today. She was having a little barbecue moment, and she was teaching one of the children, I'm not going to embarrass and say their name, how to properly, grill some corn. And I was thinking, like, baby, you don't know how to put that butter and that thing on there, wrap it in that foil. You don't know nothing no more. But I think like part of this though is like us recalling the recipes and understanding recipes that we did not know were recipes. So
Mhm.
when Torian kind of talks about this idea of you can do things whatever way you want them, you can be creative, you can be whoever you want. Like the first Africans that came over here on the slave ships literally had to invent a whole new way of being. We're talking about people in the whole of a slave ship, right? Of a ship stacked 16 bodies high and 12 across. They don't even speak the same language half the time, right? Somehow having to come over here, get processed through South Carolina, Virginia, particularly South Carolina, Virginia, but also Georgia, which was known as one of the worst states to be processed through, right? You were lucky if you got to South Carolina, Virginia. They had this whole thing about Georgia men. You didn't want to get caught and sold to a Georgia man. But thinking about you're going to this new climate, you're having to figure out ways to survive off of scraps and plants you've never seen, animals you've never seen, with people who are here enslaved with you whose languages you don't even understand. Like, if that is not self-fashioning, is that is not creating, if that is not really, and Sadia Hartman talks about this book in her book, How to Lose Your Mother, a journey among the Atlantic slave trade, and she talks about the town of Gualu. And the word Gualu means becoming anew together. And Gualu was this place in Ghana where the enslaved, well, people that they were trying to enslave ran away and literally created a town on a lake, a floating town, right, to get away from the slaver's net. And they didn't speak the same languages. They weren't from the same ethnic groups. They didn't really know each other, but they knew who the hell they were getting away from. Self-fashioning, right? And we can talk about the Gullah and the Geechee. And we can talk about the marooners across the country. We can talk about formerly enslaved people who embedded with indigenous folks, right? And learn those languages and those ways of being. So if we really get serious about our history, right? And we think about this kind of idea of freedom for pride and liberation today and abolition from prisons and police. If we just go back to the recipe, right? The ingredients and the instructions were already there, but I think all too often we get caught up in this trap of thinking about enslaved people as just slaves, right? A lot of times think about Black history, people will say, oh, slaves. Wait a minute. These are human beings. These are enslaved Africans. These are enslaved people. And I think that when we begin to think about them as enslaved people, begin to think about the heroic acts that it took to even live one day under slavery, or the fact that only 40% of people that were put on those ships survived, right? And they were having babies, going through menstrual cycles, doing all types of Herculean tasks with no epidural. We understand those recipes are the only recipes we've ever needed. But we fail to go back to the source. But I want to open it up for, of course, the rest of the panel to jump in and bring us some new topics. We have about 20 minutes left max, but I also want to make sure that folks that are in the audience, if you have some comments, questions, things you want to ask, or just manifest on, that you want to meditate on, let us know. I'm seeing some things in the chat. Let me just read this one question. If folks on the panel want to jump in, go ahead. But Darius says, living in Savannah, I love the history of the Gullah Geechee people. The food and customs alone are still there today from slavery. That's right. But their lands are in danger from rich corporate white men. And I did see that. I'm gonna I don't know if anyone can like put the link to that in the chat. I know that there's a rich actual white Latino that is trying to turn those islands into golf resorts and is essentially trying to buy out the indigenous Gullah and Geechee people. So if someone can find that link and put it in the chat. I know there's something on NPR about it as well. A question from my lovely RA. Shout out to Isaac. What are we called to do as Black queer people when we think of William Dorsey Swann, Marsha P. Johnson, Polly Murray, James Baldwin, Byron Rustin, O'Shea Sibley, my lord, that's too soon, and the countless others who put their bodies and lives on the line for the freedom of others? So Isaac, I'm gonna pick on you since you're my RA, and this is our kind of last week really working together. When you say what are we called to do, what is the context of that? I mean, you've given us this litany of Black queer people, and bring your little stuff off the camera. Don't be shy. You've given us this litany of what is really a death parade, right? Of Black queer people who have been killed, violated, maimed in particular types of ways just for being, right? Or in the essence of Marsha and Polly, were kind of left to be destitutes because they were too queer for their times, right? They were the activists, but they were left to die, kind of like Tyrone Gardner was in Orange Ridge, Texas. So Isaac, what is the context of this? What do you mean by what are we called to do? Is this an activist call, a scholarly call, a community call, a poetic call?
I can't come off camera right now, but I want to interrogate, I guess, like abolition movement. How do we fight or challenge the divisions we have between Black people and queer people, and what is the role of Black queer people in Black liberation?
Okay, you know me, I'm gonna push you. What is the division between Black people and queer people?
I want to say that just that there's a difference, that there's a binary, that there's
A real binary or a supposed binary?
supposed the carcerality of gender, the
Mhm. So you're bringing us to the Hortense Spillers, the agrammatical notion of gender, and the fact that like Black people don't actually have a stably read gender, and then this notion, right, that like Blackness is incompatible with queerness. Yeah.
yes.
Okay. And so then you're asking like, what is an abolitionist response to both this kind of notion of the kind of carceral enclosure of gender, but also the kind of day-to-day ways in which we're trying to refashion our identities.
And our families and communities.
Okay, love it. All right, who wants to take a stab at this? That's cute. I love it. Great question.
I'll take a stab at it. So there's two, there's two answers for me. One is, of course, always knowing your history, and of course, knowing about Swan, you know, Ollie Murray, Marsha Johnson, Baldwin, Sylvester, Gayle Rustin, O'Shea Rudd. You know, you should always remember these people and always keep them in your hearts because they are a part of you and they have done the work for you. On the other side, I would say support your Black queer creatives, your Black queer artists, your Black queer entrepreneurs, the ones in tech, the ones all over, and not just only support, but amplify them. When you see them doing good and doing great things, make sure that you are putting it out there and making sure that, you know, even towards our straight brothers and sisters, that you're telling them about the queer artists that are doing the things that they need to do at each and every single day, right? And that they're making progress towards the equality, like equality and everything. That's the most important thing I would recommend. Um, I, I think of a lot of artists, for example, I think of Duran, for example, like how Duran Bernard, where, of course I'll still consider him like an indie singer, but by his talent, but by the community of Black gay people knowing him and loving him and supporting him and putting him on to all of the straight people out there, to where they're like, yo, I'm going to go to a Duran Bernard concert. That's magnificent, and I can only see how big he is going to go further from here just because of his work and how we support and pour into him. I mean, as I say, our ancestors who have passed away and they have done the things that they have done, they've done it, and we remember them, and we are a part of them, and they are in us, to where we do get those people like Tobias, like Andre, like Taurean, like Duran, in order for them to be amplifying and getting the community together. So don't forget, like, of course, we want to give people their flowers when they're dead, but excuse my language, but the motherfuckers are here too, and they're going to be in our future as well. So that's what it is. We have it here. It's here, and it's even. It's even in this room. Like, seriously. So I think that's really my true answer. Support the people that are here and go hard with it. So they're going to go do things and go to the highest power to make sure that even the people, I would say for me, I don't really like, I talk a lot, but I don't really like posing my opinions all the time. They're going to be the ones who want to talk for me and say how I feel and make sure that I'm a little person that might be heard as well. So yes.
I love that. I love that, friend. And when you were speaking, but also in terms of the question, I thought back to my father, Father Baldwin. My my true father. And he has this wonderful quote, where he says, you have to decide who you are and force the world to deal with you, not with its idea of you, right? So that question really took me to that place because, Baldwin talked a lot about personal and psychological freedom, right? And he believed that true freedom, starts with confronting and overcoming our internal fears and prejudice, right? He also emphasized, I can't speak right now, y'all, the importance of self-awareness and self-acceptance as a foundation for our personal freedoms, right? So we have to do the work within, right, and abolish within, right, the prejudices and the notions and the trauma that we've been holding on to for so long before we can actually start to do the abolitionist work that we really need to do, right? Because like what Lauren Hill say, if I ain't right within, right? Um, how are we going to do that work if we ain't right within, right? How are we going to be abolitionists when we don't have an abolitionist? Well, we may have an abolitionist politic in theory, but we don't have one in practice because we ain't even practicing it on ourselves, right? Like, and how we think and how we show up and how we speak and how we treat, and how we love, right? So, yeah, I really enjoyed that question because it forced me to even think about my own abolitionist politic, right? Like in the work that I still have to do, right? I believe this, right? I want this world to be this way, and I want to show up in the world this way, but there's still shit that I have to deal with, like internally, right? To overcome that, and that comes from decades um, of being in spaces uh, and with people who have centered these unhealthy opinions or unhealthy practices, right? That sometimes we just catch on to. So yeah, I really enjoyed that question.
Torian, I want you to answer this question, but I'm also want you to kind of maybe spin into the next question. Because this question that Wendy just asked in the chat, I think it's something that is near and dear to all three of our hearts, all four of our hearts rather. And we only have 9 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to that. So if you haven't answered this one, I want you to maybe spin that into your answer to the second question. But also, secondly, I just want to say to Dre's point, like so much of abolition is not just how you treat other people, it's how you treat yourself. I've had conversations with Dre, Ace, Torian, and had to be like, wait, you're practicing this abolitionist politic with everybody else, but you. You're policing your own self. You got a sheriff in your heart disciplining you, right? When you give grace to these other people. So I do want people to understand that like abolition isn't just about how you engage with the world. It's also how you engage and imagine your own interiority. How do you treat yourself when you fuck up? How do you treat yourself when you're the toxic one? Or you're the harmful person? Now what? Right? Because how you treat you always emit in how you treat other people. But moving on to Wendy's question here, which I think is just so important to really marinate with. She says, I'm raising my young son to be happy and free to be who he is and free to live how he wants to. However, what advice do you have when you have toxic, hyper-masculine men? My God, I rebuke it. In the family that try to force a hyper-masculinity onto my son that doesn't reflect who he is. I want to go first because this, I know we all got some things to say about this. I say he better
Hey,
call on Tyrone.
well, speaking of that, Tyrone, you know which one I'm talking about. For context, y'all, Tyrone's my dad. So I feel like honestly, him seeing you affirm him, and even particularly when they're trying to force someone him and saying, "Hey, he's fine. Let him go. Let him have fun. Let him be." Right. And affirming it in front of him is going to be so important for him. I think for me, I said it before again, somebody just saying you are all right, there's nothing wrong with you. Let that child be, you know, it's going to be so important. I think that's a one small thing. Now, obviously, I think it's going to be a lot more right because it's also going to require some work saying, hey, to those men, like, look, this my baby, and my baby is going to be himself, you know. But also him seeing that as well. I think really when they're trying to force something on, like, hey, let him play with what he playing with, play how he wants to. Let him have his space. Like really just kind of stand up for him and affirming him in that moment. I think it's going to be so important for him as he grows up into whoever he chooses to be and is going to be, right? Because he's probably going to have a lot of different moments and different versions of himself that he's going to experience. But just I think that affirmation is going to be important. Um, and I think it's going to be important because again, when I reflect on Tyron, who I love down, happy Father's Day to him. Uh, it gave me eventually getting that did put me in a position where I could challenge him in space to say, this is me. This is who I am, right? Because I have been affirmed. I have learned to love and accept me and realize there's nothing wrong with me, right? I don't have to perform this. And I even at this point to recognize that I've taken only those bits of masculine that actually serve me and actually work for me. I don't have to put on a performance that y'all or whatever performance y'all running with, and in a lot of ways is harming you yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I he gets that he will take that on himself and understand eventually how to stand up for himself, right? And how to be firm in who he is. But I think definitely affirming him publicly and visibly will do that. And I think also too, just a matter of really just sticking your ground with the rest of the people in the family. Like, look, and that can also be in private too. Like, hey, this is my child, and this is who he is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to allow him to be who he is.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still thinking on that because I like that question too. I'm like, ooh,
Yeah, that's a very, I mean, it's a very,
Yeah.
very deep, intricate question
yeah,
overall. Like, I mean, absolutely, you're correct, Torian. I was going to say, of course, one thing I learned growing up was knowledge is power
Mm-hmm.
and intelligence is power. And if you're able to teach your child how to communicate how they feel, and I'm going to say particularly how they feel, because we learn about everything in the education system, and we learn about things, and we read books and so forth. But most importantly, when it comes to, I would say, sexuality, when it comes to gender, it's also it's very much bodily. It is a part of your emotional aspect. So I would say being able to I mean, you know give your child the idea of, like, how to express yourself, like by simply saying, like, how do you feel, and not it just being is I'm fine. I want you to tell me exactly how you feel and at what moment this made me feel this way and why, and being able to understand that sense of vulnerability along with the fact of learning how to understand boundaries, right? I think that for many, many gay men or many, queer people in general, that we find ourselves when we are adults that now we have to have this conversation about emotions, right? And talking about how we feel and everything like that. When in reality, if we had these conversations a long time ago when we were children, when I would say emotions were much more sensitive and we were able to feel all the things, right? Like a little, boo boo that we will have will cause us to cry, right? Which we don't have that type of feeling no more. If we were able to have that conversation and that learning of emotional intelligence, that we would be able to confront people of, this is how I feel, and I can understand the way that you feel, but this is how I will feel, and this is how I will be, and that part will create that sense of being much more stronger. So yes, I would say, you know under allowing our kids to understand more of their emotions, be able to become intelligent in their emotions, and that should be a very good facet between, to get to where they're able to deal with that.
So, Dre, I'm going to give you the last word before, we announce our little next venture and move on and things and close up because we are at 9:28. But I just want to say really quickly, I have a little bit different advice than everybody else. I think the best thing that ever happened to me was that my toxic father was not in the picture. I did not
Boom.
have years of toxic behavior or modeling from men to undo. I was thankfully raised with my mother and my grandmother, who raised me to be the man they wish they had, right? Though not the men that they had, not the abusers, not the liars, not the cheaters, not the hyper masculine person that can't communicate. And so my advice is when you're talking about toxic people, a child should never be around a toxin. If you would not allow your child to inhale gasoline, they should not be able to inhale toxic masculinity or feel the violence of it from someone who is not necessarily integral to their life. And if you're harming me, you're not integral, right? And so I just think, and I made a joke about it earlier, but I believe they need to call on Tyrone, okay, and tell him come home and help you get your shit. That's what that is to me. I don't think any child deserves to be exposed to anything harmful. They don't have agency. They don't get to choose anything. And the experiences they have right now make imprints on their mind. It's going to impact who they date, who they have sex with, how they engage with alcohol and other substances. And you have the opportunity right now to save that child 5, 10, 15 years of therapy, 6 or 7 bad relationships. And it's not worth the feelings of these toxic men. If they want to be in that child's life, stop being toxic, go wash and repeat, honey, get your life together. Because toxicity is transferable. And so I'll get off my soapbox on that and pass it over to our elder, Dre.
I think all of you have really encompassed a lot of the things I want to say, but the one thing I will return to is the idea of, home being a place of freedom, but also liberation as well, right? And this sense of belonging and how home should always be a place where, you know, your son feels accepted and valued. And it definitely seems like that is the case, right? And even in a broader sense for Black queer individuals, finding communities that acknowledge and affirm our identities can be challenging. So the first place that, in our first community, right, is usually our family, right, or our friends or those who are closest, to us. So, knowing that he has you as not just a mother, but also as an advocate, right, for his humanity and for his freedom, I think is going to be extremely important, in his development. And without the freedom to participate, in such communities that I was just speaking about, the sense of belonging, that makes a place, feel like home can really be lacking. So I don't know. I just think just y- y- by you having like this thought process, right, of protecting your son and affirming your son and advocating for him, is really the most important thing. For me, I'm kind of like, fuck everybody else, right? The toxic men in my family, the cousins and whatnot, because they're gonna they're gonna be who they are. And most of them ain't gonna change, right? They're gonna continue to be toxic, but he's always gonna have you as his advocate, right? And as he continues to grow older, he's going to feel this sense of freedom to be, whoever he, develops into being. So I definitely want to shout you out though, for being that amazing mom, because I know it's something that some of us who didn't have at that age wish we would have had, right? And wish we had had the ability for a mother to be not just a mother, but also an advocate, right? For us to practice freedom and to experience that liberation. So, yeah.
Mhm. So Dre, would you like to announce our lovely new venture as we wrap up here?
Yeah. So like we said, we are all very close friends, and it's so crazy that we had this discussion on Zoom tonight, because this is the type of shit we talk about when we sit around on our whiskey or wine Wednesdays with hookah and bourbon. Me, I like a good Glenlivet, Um, so we have been talking about this for quite some time, and we noticed that a lot of times, a lot of the conversation out there can, just be very surface level, right? And not get into the heart of what's really happening, as Black queer individuals, right? In this country. And I think we all are positioned through our lived experiences and the work that we do and the sort of politics that we practice, um, to talk about these things on a regular basis, right? But also to do it in a fun way that's creative, and allows y'all to see a different side of us, right? Like, I'm pretty sure you know Dr. Wilson as the brilliant academic, right? But this man is hilarious. Like he's a comedian. And Taurean, right? Like Taurean's probably one of the more shy folks in the group, I would say. But like Taurean's brilliant, like as y'all all saw tonight. And he has so much to say, and the world should hear his voice. And then Asa, I think, is the glue that holds us all together at all times. You know, he is the one who challenges us to really expand our politic and how we think. And I just love hearing his takes. Like he said, he doesn't usually like sharing them, and we get to hear them. But more people need to hear them, friend. So we are going to be kicking off a podcast with the four of us. It's called Friendship Pact Pod. It's coming soon. We're not going to drop an exact date yet. You know, we're still working that out, but it's coming soon, and we'll be able to, you know, have more discussions like this. But also, you'll get to, you know, really experience our expanded community because there's more of us, right? Like, while us four will be the primaries, we're definitely going to have our other friends on. We know some of the most amazing people in this country who are doing work in their respective spaces, and we want the world to, and we want y'all to know them as well, as intimately as we do. So we think the podcast is a great avenue to really showcase that. So yeah, I'm going to drop some socials right now. We just kicked off some socials today. On we have X and TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube will be coming soon. And also, if y'all just have questions or y'all want to hear something particular from the group, I'm going to drop our Gmail as well in the chat. So I'm gonna kick it back to you, Dr. Wilson.
Dr. Dre over there gave us all a wonderful amounts of kudos and affirmations. But I do have to say that Dre is also one of the ones that holds the group together. You know, that is our elder sister, our mother, our auntie. When we all have little squabbles between us, Dre come in like, children, why y'all acting a fool now? Everybody calm down. What's this foolishness? And I can say that, you know, very clearly that, you know, Dre is, I think, the more experienced of us when it also comes to working not just in the organizing world, but also in the political strategy world. So I think we all have our own experiences talking about what does it mean to be Black and queer in these spaces. But Dre has a real on the ground experience, both as a strategist, but also as an organizer, about like, how do you live through these moments, right? What does the other side look like when you don't win, right? How do you keep going? But also, how do you keep going in friendship and relationship when you've lost the argument? Or you're harmed or you feel hurt in this particular type of way. So as Dre's affirmed us, I also want to note that that's our auntie, Mama Bear over there. You know, we love her so much. And then, you know, thank you all. You know, we're 7 minutes over. And for those of you that have been to panels that I've discussed before, you know, I hate going over and I hate starting late. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been recorded. It will be posted shortly. You will get the socials that Dre sent out in the chat. I'll send them in an email tomorrow. But, you know, bless you and bless Juneteenth. And let's keep this freedom and liberation train and practice running. Have a good night, y'all, and take good care. May the melanin be with you, sweeties.